Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's almost 2:20, and so we'll be starting off in a few minutes, 4 minutes. But for now, good to see you guys. Hope you've been having a good week. And just to kind of get comfortable, we'll be starting in just a few. Welcome back, guys. Just a couple more minutes. Hey, Philip. How's it going? Good to see you. Just about 2 minutes to go. All right, welcome, guys. Just another minute, pretty much. Hi, Janae. Good to see you. Hey, Brittany. You guys are having a nice week so far? Is this your last lecture of the week for school? Well, I guess you guys are taking probably all these online classes, so there's no real meetings, actually. But anyway, it's good to be with you. Hi, Anna. Hi, Remy. You like the rain? I like the rain too, but since I'm such a big time runner, and it is a little more comfortable when you don't have to deal with the elements, that's kind of my little internal contradiction, I guess. Hi there, Lan and Kellen and everybody else. Welcome back. So it's 2:20. I'm just going to let us get kind of gradually started now. Welcome back, everybody, and hope you're having a good week and a good semester so far. Let me just make a few points as we get started. So, right, like earlier this afternoon, I sent a Canvas notification to the class just notifying you that the first quiz has now been graded. So I'm done with the first quiz, and the first homework, I finished that a while ago. So in the message, I just invited students that want to know their score on the, hi Danny and everyone, hi, good to see you guys. I was just saying that if you want to know your score for the quiz or for the first homework or for both or anything, just email me and I'll be able to reply with your score and comments. It just takes me sometimes a little bit of time since I have a lot of emails coming in, but if you send me a request for any grade, I'll get back to you within 48 hours. So, so please do contact me and I'll be replying through the weekend to all my students so that you know your grade on these first few things. If you haven't already at least learned your grade for the first homework, now you can check on the quiz or the homework or both. So thanks guys for that. Now we keep moving forward. The next thing that we will have this semester is the midterm exam. And the midterm exam for us, sorry, let me looking at the different document. Yeah, so it's Thursday, March 25th. That's 3 weeks from today. So that's the date of the midterm exam. Between now and then, we just have to, today we're going to try and finish up all the material in Chapter 3. And then next week, both lectures are going to be dedicated to Chapter 4. And then the following week, we'll wrap up Chapter 4 and then start into our midterm review sessions. I'll give you guys a study guide for the midterm, and we'll be able to use that to guide us through the review session meetings. And then on the 25th, you'll have the midterm. Then after that, we have a 1 week spring break, so you'll have some time off to just kind of rest and chill. When we come back after that, it'll be the second half of the semester, and new chapters from the book, more assignments, quizzes, and stuff will follow from there. But for now, anyways, you're done with the first two things, first homework, first quiz, and we're building towards the midterm, which happens in 3 weeks from today. Okay, guys, so welcome back. It's good to see everybody here. If you haven't had a chance to do it yet, make sure to always leave a little comment somewhere at some point during the meeting, and that's how I'll kind of, to some degree, keep tabs on the attendance that you've been having throughout the semester. But all right, then. So welcome back. It's good to be with you guys. Let's go ahead and continue on Chapter 3. Chapter 3, as you guys now know, is all about language and communication. So the first thing I want to ask is, who could tell me what is the definition of language? Maybe that's a good way to dive back into the chapter. And then from there, I'll review a few things that we talked about on Tuesday, and we'll just continue through the notes from that point. So what is language? Does anyone have the ability to tell me? We talked about it last time, so you would find it in your notes or in the book or both, or just your memory. So what is not knowledge, what is language? Yeah, that's the question. What's language? Just I'm going to give you a minute or a couple moments here to collect your thoughts, but put it in the chat when you think you've got the answer here. I'm sure someone will tell me. It's a system of something, and it involves, okay, good, thanks, Lan. It is a system of communication which involves a set of symbols that can be either written, spoken, or nonverbal. Yes, very good, that's true, that's the right definition. So language is clearly just fundamental to the human condition. What is it that makes us higher life forms, endowed with greater powers of understanding, judgment, and knowledge than, let's say, dogs and cats and cows and pigs and chickens? It's because we have language. It's because we can represent concepts in words that we can either say or write or convey by means of nonverbal signs. If we didn't have language, we would never be aware of anything that wasn't happening in our immediate environment. We would not know anything of the distant past, nor would we be able to coordinate behavior in the same highly specialized way that humans can by talking to each other and giving each other commands and directions. So how is it that you know anything about the world that existed before you were born? If you were an animal, you would never know anything about that. But because you're a human, you know a lot of facts about history, you know a lot of facts about chemistry, biology, astronomy, science, literature, and that's what language gives us, the ability to discuss these matters, record them, and pass them on and transmit them to others. So language is a big thing. We're born into the language of our native tongue. It transmits information from person to person and from generation to generation. Some think that there's a universal grammar that underlies all the different thousands of world languages. That's Noam Chomsky's view. I think that's the majority view in linguistics. Others don't agree with his statement because they think there are some atypical languages if you look hard enough. We then talked about different functions of language. So what are things that language can be used to do or to accomplish? We talked about 4 primary functions. 1, the informative function of language. That's simply just making statements that are either true or false. And that's perhaps the primary function of language, especially for logic. If I inform you of something, I'm telling you a claim, I'm giving an assertion, and it's either a true or a false assertion. Saying that Sacramento is the capital of California is true information. If I pass it on to you, I'm giving you something that's a true fact. If I told you that the capital of California was Los Angeles, that's not correct, but I could still convey that information to you, which would be false. Okay, so when you ever say something that can be judged or determined as true or false, you're using the informative function of language. Another function of language is the directive function. That's when you use words to direct people's behavior or actions. So it's the use of imperative statements to command or to direct behavior. If a person is told, get out of the car, get on the ground, give me that, don't touch that, get over here, these are all just directives, and that's directive language. Sometimes in life, we're not trying to convey information, but we're trying to organize human behavior and direct people into what we want them to do. So that's another main function of language. There's also expressive language, which is language that's used to convey feelings and attitudes and to bring about an emotional response or impact. Think of song lyrics, poetry, and verse. In that case, no one is being told what to do, neither is one being given literal information or facts, but you're going to kind of gain a sense of the emotional quality of the lyrical or poetic content. And then there's ceremonial language, which is language that's used in official or formal situations, like wedding ceremonies or court proceedings or debate on the floor of Congress or the swearing in of a person by taking the oath of office, Miranda rights, and so on. So sometimes language is used in a sort of formal way, which is governed by rules of procedure or even in some cases laws. And that's when language is particular to the ceremony itself. Okay, after that, we talked a little bit about different aspects of nonverbal language, body language, tone of voice, because it's important to keep in mind not just what you say, but how you say it and how you use your nonverbal cues to indicate information. So we should use all the tools at our disposal of both verbal and nonverbal and written communication. For example, try and incorporate hand gestures, nodding, pointing, and so forth when you communicate with people to add emphasis, vitality, and expressiveness to the way that you communicate. We do that somewhat naturally, but thinking about how to advance and enhance your verbal communication through the use of body language is to your benefit. Keep also in mind how sometimes body language can give away when you're being dishonest or withholding facts, like if you can't keep a steady gaze or you're giving micro expressions or unsteadiness of voice, etc. Pictures can tell 1,000 words. Images, photo, and video can often provide greater emphasis and depth to understanding than just what we could have achieved by speech or writing. So you guys are all, I think, pretty competent, tech-savvy, digital-minded young people, so you're probably already in the habit of attaching photos, memes, emojis, and all of that to commentary that you share with friends and that you post on social media. But we should also be able to bring those same skills to our professional lives, our academic lives, and use them to be more effective and capable communicators. From there, we talked about what are some different types of meaning and what are different types of definitions. And that's where we ran out of time. So basically, we talked about how there's denotative versus connotative meaning. Denotative meaning is the meaning that you would find like in an official dictionary definition of a word. It expresses the essential attributes of the thing, and it's not kind of colored by past experience or associations. So it's just a neutral dictionary definition, not a slang definition. But connotative meaning does involve slang. It does involve past experience and associations, and they say it can be positive or negative in force. So like the single word dog, as I mentioned last time, as the denotative meaning, which specifies that type of mammalian domestic canine. But we could also use the word dog as a slang term to either refer to your friends with like the positive associations of loyalty that dogs bring, or talking about someone that you think is like as ugly as a dog, or like men are dogs, meaning that they're kind of just animal-like or bestial, and that would to import negative connotations from the nature of that type of animal to the meaning of the word. Okay, we also then talked about different types of definitions, stipulative definitions. These are definitions that are given to new words that appear in our language over time. Clearly, as the world changes, new technologies emerge, new social customs and traditions emerge. We have words that then have to be developed to capture the meaning of these new things. So like think of a word like gigabyte or laptop or skyscraper, COVID-19, right? These are words that would not have had any meaning prior to the time at which the phenomenon came to exist. So keep your mind on the fact that language is always changing and new words enter the lexicon each year. There's also theoretical definitions, which are definitions given to scientific terms like force, mass, acceleration, entropy, gravity. And then we talk last about operational definitions, which are definitions that are given as a kind of boundary or threshold to create standardization in the use of terms. So for example, the legal limit of blood alcohol concentration before you're legally defined in our state as driving under the influence is 0.08. Although some people may say they feel more or less inebriated at 0.08 than others, we have to have one uniform standard under the law, so we operationally define it as such. If you're wondering what the definition of obesity is, obesity is something, well, back we come to POG, right? That I think we just covered in the stipulative definition stuff. But operational definition would be also like how we define obesity with reference to the BMI metric. Body mass index beyond a certain numeric threshold is classified medically as being obese, even though people famously have very wildly different subjective understandings of what it is for them to be obese. We have to have a common standard that we can all use in medical discussions, so that the BMI. Okay, so now guys, we're going to continue. We have one more type of definition to list here, and then we'll move to some further notes. So we said stipulative, theoretical, operational. One more, persuasive definitions. Okay, so persuasive definitions, you have to kind of approach with caution, be a little bit skeptical of them, because this is when a person gives a definition of something, but it's not a neutral, regular definition. It's a skewed definition which shows a bias that they have either for or against this thing that they are defining. So it's basically giving a definition which is trying to persuade somebody to accept one's point of view. That's what that is. So used to persuade others to accept one's point of view or perspective on something. Okay, so used to persuade others to accept a person's point of view. Let me give you some examples, and some of these are mentioned in the book too. So suppose that someone's asking or inquiring, what does this word taxation mean? And so they ask a person, and the person says, you want to really know what is taxation? Well, I have very strong opinions on this. I'll tell you what I think it is. Taxation is theft. Taxation is when the government, reaches into your wallet and takes money out that you worked hard for and then spends it on things that maybe you don't agree with or that you don't even need. So I'll tell you, taxation is theft. It's theft from the working man or woman to spend on priorities that we don't share. Okay, well, if a person went into that way of defining taxation, basically that it's theft, then clearly they're trying to persuade you to feel a certain type of way about taxation or to have a certain opinion on it. So that's a loaded definition. It's a skewed, biased definition. It's not a denotative meaning of the word. What would be the person's attempt here? They're trying, if they say taxation is theft, to get you to have what kind of opinion about taxation? Just let me know in the chat. Simple question, but that's what I'm asking. If a person says definition of taxation equals theft, they must be trying to persuade or convince you through the definition to think what, or to have what view about it. So let's see in the chat. If it was defined in that way, what's the basic message they're trying to deliver with that way of defining it? Just let me know. I know that you can tell me. So what is it? You heard the question, right? But you have to still answer it. If a person says taxation is theft, yeah, that it's wrong, that it's bad, very much so. Yeah, that's correct, Stephen. So a person who claims to define it in that way doesn't just have a neutral desire to tell you what the word means in its denotative sense. they're trying to give you a negative skewed perspective on it. And I'm not just trying to pick on a person that's like a libertarian-minded individual, because that's the type of person who would say this. Taxation is theft. Oh, you know, don't tread on me, big government, get out of my life. Well, you could also imagine a person on the opposite ideological spectrum. What is capital? What is, you know, private property or private wealth? Someone that's like a hardcore socialist, they might say, oh, well, that's theft. You know, you think that you're just accumulating money and you're just making money for yourself. Actually, you're divesting wealth from less fortunate people and spending it on yourself and your rich friends. So I say private property is theft, or I say capitalism is theft. That would be to try and, again, persuade a person to have a certain type of viewpoint on the issue, not necessarily to just define the word. So, I mean, what is taxation if you just gave a neutral definition? It is the appropriation of revenue from citizens in order to fund public programs that we all use. Is this good? Is this bad? Well, that's a separate discussion. You can have a moral argument about whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, on ethical or policy grounds, but that's separate from the simple question, what is it? What is genetic engineering? You know, what if a person has a real disposition to not like that kind of stuff? So you ask them, what's genetic engineering? They say, I'll tell you, it's playing God. I mean, genetic engineering is playing God with, you know, genetic material of nature for whatever weird human purposes that we may have. But that person, again, is trying to get you to take a sort of cynical and negative view of genetic engineering. And, you know, there are viable and legitimate reasons why we, for example, have genetically engineered crops and stuff, because we want to kind of optimize the consumer product for human consumption. So we want to have, like, I don't know, the biggest tomatoes and stuff. We can genetically engineer them to be that way, or we can make them be seedless or something like that if we don't want to have them reproducing in a way that we can't control. So if you told someone it's just the manipulation of genetic material for a desired human purpose, that leaves it neutral and therefore open for a person to interpret that it's good or bad on either side. So anyway, be a little bit skeptical of the persuasive definitions when you hear them from people. Oftentimes they prevent you from coming to your own conclusions or reaching the truth for yourself, and they don't make appeal to argument. They just give you a definition and leave it at that. Let me see if I can offer anything else from the book. It says this: persuasive definitions are used as a means to persuade or influence others to accept one's point of view. The definition of taxation as a form of theft or genetic engineering as playing God with the human genome are both examples of persuasive definitions. Often these type of definitions use emotional language, such as the negatively emotionally charged term theft in the first example. There's nothing inherently wrong with using persuasive or emotional language. Emotional language in poetry and fiction, for example, is clearly appropriate. However, if our primary intention is simply to convey information, then it's best to avoid using it. Persuasive definitions, because their primary intention is to influence our attitudes instead of conveying information, can be a problem in critical thinking when they distract us from getting to the truth. So you got to sometimes be able to see through a persuasive definition, which is trying to shape your own views in line with someone else's opinion. Take measure of that. It's a tendency that people have, and if you're hearing a persuasive definition, you might want to ask for a less loaded or more neutral way of describing the same thing. Okay, so then we've finished with the different types of definitions. That's one part of Chapter 3 notes. Now as we move on, the next part is what are different criteria that can be used to evaluate a definition? In other words, what are qualities of a good definition? So the textbook mentions 5 qualities of good definitions. Okay, so language is built out of words. Words have definitions. And so one thing to understand is that not all definitions are equal. Some are more accurate to the task of defining the thing that the word stands for than others. So some definitions are basically more accurate than other ones are. And we need to be able to understand what qualities are found in good definitions so that we can distinguish between the case of those that are good and those that are not. So here are 5 qualities of a good definition that we should be aware of. First of all, a good definition is neither too broad nor too narrow. So there you go. One thing, a good definition is neither too broad nor too narrow. Let me explain. So a definition would be too broad, and therefore not a great definition, if it was stated in such a way that it refers to more things than the term actually denotes. Okay, so if the definition is given in such a way that it includes even more than what the word really refers to, then it's overbroad. It's too general, too generic. On the other hand, you can have the opposite problem. Sometimes the definition is overly specific and it's too narrow. Therefore, it does not actually include as many things as the word actually stands for. So you can have a definition that's over-inclusive or under-inclusive, and it can fail on either side. Here, let's give some examples. Suppose that someone is asked, what is a car? You know, they're asking definition of the word car, and you report back, well, here's what that word means. A car is a mode of transportation. So there you go, that's the definition. So this is a way of trying to define the word car, but it's not good because it's either, well, you can tell me. If someone says car equals mode of transportation, is this too broad or is this too narrow of a definition of car? That's the new question for you. Hi, Elizabeth and everybody else here. Good to see you guys, as usual. Thanks for being at the meeting. But it is too broad, correct, Lan? Why? Because, well, true, a car is a mode of transportation, but that does not narrow it down enough because there's all kinds of other modes of transportation too. You've got trains, planes, subways, skateboards, bicycles, motorcycles. So saying it's just a way from getting to transport from point A to point B, that doesn't narrow it down specifically enough. Given that definition, we haven't really specified exactly which forms of transportation are the cars. So another attempt. So you ask, what's a car? Someone says, anything that's been produced by the Ford Motor Company. Well, now we're too specific because that's just one type of make and model of car. And that doesn't fully represent all cars and all different types of products that are made as cars. So to give the right definition, you have to have all and only the things that the word really refers to based on the way you state the definition. So, I mean, if I was going to attempt to define car, it's kind of tough, but I meant maybe passenger vehicle, which is used as a mode of transportation and has an internal combustion engine or electric or hybrid engine. It's typically got 3 or 4 wheels, usually 4, but I have seen a couple of those weird tripod-like type of cars with a cabin. Anyway, I mean, maybe that's a good attempt to define it. It doesn't seem like it's overbroad nor too narrow. Again, like if I was trying to ask, what's a dog? And someone says, it's a mammal. That's true, but it's too broad because there's so many other mammals, lions, tigers, bears, human beings, cats. So if you say, oh, dog is just anything that's a Cocker Spaniel, now it's too narrow because that's just one breed of dogs. So you'd have to say something that includes all the dogs but doesn't include more than them, nor fewer of them than there actually are, okay? What about, one more thought, define the term square. If you just say polygon, that's overbroad. Polygon just means multi-sided closed plane figure. But there's triangles, squares, rectangles, octagons, dodecahedrons, etc. So that's not really giving enough specific information to narrow it down to just what a square is. Okay, so understand then, a good definition is neither too broad nor too narrow, but just right. Sometimes maybe you guys remember old children's stories. A lot of the details have been lost on me over time, but I do remember something about an old story called Goldilocks and the Three Bears. All I can seem to remember is this thing about porridge. You guys know what I'm talking about? There's one porridge that's too hot, one that's too cold, and there's one that's just right. Now, the only reason I'm bringing that up is sort of a little bit of an analogy to this. A good definition is neither too broad and general, nor too narrow and specific, but just right. It includes all and only the things that the word refers to, but not more nor less. Okay, so there you go. That's one point of a good definition. Keep in mind, right, you're thinking, well, what do you mean good or bad definition? They're just written in the dictionary, so they're already good. The thing is, sometimes you're the student or the person who's being asked to define something. Like on school assignments, you take a quiz, you take a test. The professor's quiz form, test form, it says, here, define this word. Now you're the one who's trying to write the right definition, right? And if you're one doing that, you don't want to give a definition that's not specific enough nor overly confining and narrow. So it's important to know these concepts. Anyway, next up, another quality of a good definition is a good definition needs to state all the essential attributes of whatever is being defined, leaving no basic core defining attributes out. Okay, so states all essential attributes. Okay, so let's go back to the case I just mentioned of the square, because I think it's very good for explaining this current point. Who can define what a square is? Try to get all the essential features in there in your definition. I'd love to know who can tell me what's a square. That's it. That's the question. I mean, you may have studied geometry at some point, or even if you didn't, I'm sure you kind of understand the concept. So what is a square? Is it easy to tell me? If so, just put it out there, and let's see what you come up with. And we're focused on this. I need all the essential attributes, not just one, not just two, but all of them. So what are all the essential features of the polygon that you call a square? Okay, Kellen, you say 4 sides, 4 corners, all sides are equal. That's pretty close. Nathan, you have the one extra thing that kind of, I guess, makes it a perfect definition, because the one thing that was missing from Kellen's attempt was to say that the interior angles are all 90-degree right angles. Because just based on what you said, Kellen, no problem. I'm just trying to be a little bit, teacher or whatever. But if you just say 4 sides, 4 corners, and the sides are equal, there's also like the rhombus shape, like this, and that can have 4 equal sides of equal length, but it's not a square. There's also the diamond shape, like this, which again can have 4 equal sides and 4 equal side lengths. So you have to have those interior angles be 90 degrees, like this, right? Now that's a perfect definition of a square. It's essential to squares that they have 4 sides, but just saying 4-sided polygon would not eliminate the case of the rectangle and the diamond and the rhombus. So you have to say 4 sides of equal length, but that still doesn't exclude the rhombus or the diamond. So that's why you also have to say the interior angles are exactly 90 degrees. But if you say this, that's a perfect definition of a square, because every single square, no matter how big or small it is in terms of surface area, is a 4-sided figure where the sides have equal length and the interior angles are all 90 degrees. So mentioning each of those different features states all the essential attributes of the square. Had one of them been missing, we would have left out something basic to the concept. Okay, so I see here you guys have said 4-cornered shape with all equal sides. Good, Philip, same. 2-dimensional shape with 4 sides. Brittany, the only thing missing there are those extra things I mentioned to narrow it down to squares and not also include rectangles. All right, very good. So just a mention of that. Now, I'm talking about a geometric figure. In everyday life, sometimes you're defining things that are more like tangible and practical than shapes in math or in geometry. But the same principles apply. You know, if you're trying, like in a legal argument, to define a fact about the law or about a principle in the Constitution or something, then you might have to state all the essential attributes under that definition or understanding in the same way as we see here. So, okay. Another quality of a good definition as we go through 5 is that it can never be circular, not circular. So what is a circular definition? A circular definition is a definition that makes mention of the word itself in its own definition, and that's bad. Obviously, if you have to ask what the word means, then you can't use the word itself because then you're explaining the word in terms of itself, and therefore you've not advanced anyone's understanding. You only ask for a definition if you don't know what the word means. So repeating it as its own definition makes no sense. How frustrated would you be if you're looking up the meaning of the word square in the dictionary, and when you looked at it, it said, anything that is in the shape of a square? Be like, come on, I mean, that's the word itself, though. I'm looking for what it means. So you always have to define any word in other words. If you use the same word in the definition, it's going in a circle. It's like, I'm looking for what this word means, and I get pinged back to the word itself. And that's not an effective way of defining anything. If I say a teacher is someone that teaches, that's a circular definition. So I have to describe what it is to teach in other words that don't refer to the same exact term itself. Okay? And let me say this, as a professor, so I give out a lot of quizzes, tests, and stuff in my everyday, academic career. And sometimes you'll see that when a student is really stumped and they don't know how to define something, it could be like, here, tell me what's the definition of the 3rd stage of cognitive development or whatever. And, someone, if they can't remember it or they can't find their notes and they don't want to leave it blank, I've seen this happen many times where they'll just write the same term again. What is an operational definition? And someone's like, operational definition. They just write the term again. But that's not worth any credit at all because it's just repeating the question, right? So when you ask the meaning of a word, you can't use the word to sort of just say it means itself, okay? I mean, in a way, it's true that it means itself, but you have to still understand the meaning by means of other concepts that you do understand. Okay, so can't have circular definitions. And then, I don't know, is there anything in the book on that that I could offer as an additional piece of discussion? It says here, you should avoid using the term itself or variations of it within a definition, like a teacher is one that teaches. Or, I can't even pronounce this, erythropoiesis is the production of erythrocytes. Since a circular definition gives little or no new information about the meaning of the term, it's understandable only to a person that already knows the definition of the term. Okay, another point to consider when we look at a good definition. So here's the fourth one. The fourth one is a good definition should avoid overly technical and obscure language. Avoids overly technical and obscure language. Okay, so sometimes the problem with a certain definition is not that it's actually technically incorrect, but rather that because of how complex the words are in the definition, your audience still doesn't understand what you're saying. I mean, imagine if you were dealing with a doctor who gave you a medical diagnosis for a disease that you don't understand very well. And you were like, doctor, you say that I have osteoporosis. Can you explain to me what that means? And then the doctor, imagine, starts getting into medical jargon that you don't know. It'd be like, oh, okay, well, osteoporosis is basically when you have like a pre-tensile discharge in the lower carotid, blah, blah, blah. And they start saying things that only a fellow physician would understand. Now, if that's the case, you might be sitting there, you might even nod along like, okay, I guess, but it's going right over your head. And you emerge from that interaction still wondering, but what is it though? Like you just described it, but only in words that a fellow professional could understand. So sometimes people are experts or specialists on a topic. And when they are, a lot of times, if you guys are on your own, like an expert or a specialist in anything, then you develop a whole bunch of jargon and technical terms that are peculiar to the people who are deeply knowledgeable about that subject matter. If you're talking to another fellow specialist, feel free to have shop talk where you guys speak about terms that average Joe people that have not studied this material don't know. But if you're trying to provide an understanding to a person that's not on the same level of familiarity, you have to make sure to take into account their level of understanding and pitch the definition so that it does not go over their head. So here's an example from the book that I think is kind of funny. Some people are specialists in the world of creating nets. Imagine that. So netting specialists, the build, the construction, the design, the production of nets. So ask such a person, you're a net specialist. Can you tell me what exactly is a net though? Like what's the real definition of net? And the person says, okay, you want to know? It's a good question. The precise definition is this. It's anything that is reticulated or decussated at equal distances with interstices between the intersections. Okay, so that's the definition of a net, but does it make any sense to a person who's not fully informed on all these technical terms? Like, what is it for something to be reticulated? What is the verb to reticulate? What is decussated? What does that verb mean? And what does it mean for there to be decussated at equal distances with interstices between each intersection? Now, maybe that is a formal definition of nets, but unless you know the meaning of all these other embedded terms, you still won't have any clear understanding. So just keep in mind that sometimes you have to kind of bring a very heady and complex definition down to earth a bit so that whoever you're talking with or dealing with can understand you. The whole point of offering a definition is to provide understanding of a word to a person who didn't already understand it before. So if you give a person a definition, which technically is correct but incomprehensible to the lay person, then it kind of defeats the purpose of the request for the meaning of the word because they come away still uninformed. Now I'll say this, from my point of view as a professor, a big part of my job is specifically to give definitions of concepts to students as they're studying topics in philosophy and logic. Like I'll tell a person, here is what is modus ponens, and here's the definition of that kind of argument, or here is what it is for something to be deductively valid. And I try to make sure you would comprehend these definitions. Therefore, I'm actually quite aware of this concept because a big part of my job, maybe one of the main parts, is to try and imagine what it is for a student to be experiencing this information on their side of the interaction that we're having. So I'm not trying to talk to you like as I would talk to a fellow professor in the academy. using a bunch of high-level jargon. If I introduce jargon to you, I try and build a bridge from things you already understand to this new concept that you don't understand yet. So sometimes you're in that type of position as the specialist, dealing with a novice or a non-specialist. And that's when this really is on you to pay attention that you don't overwhelm the person with information and complex terms that make it impossible for them to really understand. Okay, and then there's one more quality of a good definition, so I'll put it here. It should also avoid emotional language, avoids emotional language. This kind of ties back into what we were saying just a moment ago about persuasive definitions and how they try to shape your view without giving you a reasonable argument. So it's always a giveaway that something's problematic about a definition if it starts going into like emotionally charged language. Like you ask someone, what's abortion? And they say, oh, it's the horrible, disgusting, despicable act of killing a child or whatever. I mean, that's a persuasive definition, and you can tell because of the emotionally charged language, horrible, despicable, atrocious. The denotative meaning of the same thing is simply, the intentional termination of pregnancy by the bearer of the fetus. Is this good? Is this bad? Well, there's a separate moral debate to be had on that, and there are fine arguments on either side. But if you just want to know what a word means, then you don't need to be told how to feel about it emotionally, whether it's good, bad, awesome, terrible, or anything else. So if we're just trying to provide information to people, then we don't need to necessarily import all these emotional associations to the concept of what the word means. In the book, it says this: a good definition avoids emotional language. The definition of feminist as a man-hater or man as oppressor of women would be two examples of definitions geared to inflame emotions rather than to stimulate rational debate or discussion. So as you go out through the world, both asking for the meaning of words and in some cases providing them to others that are interested in knowing, try your best to focus on the quality of the definition by including these various features. And be willing and able to tell people that the way they've explained something is a little bit unclear or difficult to understand for any of the reasons that are given here. Okay, so that's good. We'll move on from that part of the notes. So the next thing in the book from chapter 3 that we got to talk about a little are what are different styles of communication that people have, ways that people present their speech in everyday conversation and communication. What you'll understand and learn is that there are different ways that people have a tendency to communicate. And by knowing these different styles of communication, you can better adapt to the purposes of your current situation. Sometimes the style of communication that you bring to one situation is not suitable for that situation. You have to sort of be like a chameleon and modify your approach a little bit. For example, sometimes you grow up in like a family where everyone's very loud and that's just normal in that household. Everyone's kind of like, kind of pokes fun at people a little bit, is willing to just come right out and say stuff in a blunt, plain-spoken manner. But when you bring that same method of communication to a professional setting or an academic setting or a job interview or whatever, what's normal at home might come across as aggressive or hostile, even if you're not trying to be that way. Or in other cases, maybe you come from a household where people prioritize not speaking out of turn and everyone's very mild-mannered, and that's okay and normal in your household. But now that comes across as aloof or detached or something in a different type of social setting. So we do have to be aware of different types of communication styles so that we can sometimes adjust our approach to meet the needs of the circumstances and also to adapt to other people so that we can compare our approach to theirs. So let's talk about 4 styles of communication. Okay, so 4 basic styles or types of communication that individuals use. And I'm just going to list them first, and then we'll go through the definitions and some examples. There's aggressive style of communication. Okay, then you've got the passive style of communication too. Then there's assertive. And then finally, you've got passive aggressive. Okay, 4 styles of communication, and we'll now discuss it. First of all, the aggressive style. So I'm sure just by the name or the word itself, you have a sense of this. The aggressive communicator, they're really all about just one main thing. They want to get their way. They want to get their way no matter what, at all costs. Even if the cost is alienating people, damaging or destroying the relationships that you have with people. So that's aggressive communication. One wants to get their way at all costs. One wants to get their way at all costs, and importantly, even if this damages relationships with people. I guess the aggressive communicator doesn't so much care about that as much as getting their way all the time. So that's one way of doing it. That's one way of communicating. We'll talk about examples where this might not be such a good idea, but understand that some people have a tendency to be more aggressive in the way they communicate. On the opposite side of the spectrum, though, there's passive communication, which is just the reverse. With passive communication, a person, to the contrary, they hate confrontation. They want to avoid confrontation at all costs, which you might think, oh, that's nice because people aren't going to get mad at them or getting into a lot of fights with them, but that has its own drawbacks. If you are so afraid of confrontation and conflict, then you're going to be a pushover type of person. You'll always back down very easily. You won't stand up for yourself or assert yourself, even if there's something important that you want or that you need. So passive communication, one wants to avoid conflict at all costs, or one wants to avoid confrontation at all costs. And because of that, they just back down easily. So I'll put and backs down easily. All right, so aggressive, passive, total contrasts. Now, here's what I think. Assertive communication, in my mind, is like a nice middle ground when you're not sure of how you should deal with a given situation. I find that this is a good default mode because it doesn't have some of the drawbacks of aggressive and passive, but it has, I think, the strengths. So assertive communication is basically this. You say to a person with confidence, calmly and confidently, what you want or need. But at the same time, you're willing to assert yourself. You're not going to hold back, but you're also not going to go too far, and you know when to back off a little bit so that you don't destroy relationships with people. So one says confidently and calmly what they want or need. One says what they want or need calmly, like not angry, not hostile, but in a calm way, calmly and with confidence. Sorry, I'm just make sure you can see that's the letter C. Confidence. I'm going to put the passive aggressive at the top because I want a little more extra room. So anyway, assertive. One says what they want or need calmly and with confidence, but knows when to hold back. And when and why, it knows when to hold back in order to preserve relationships. So that's assertive. It's not coming at someone, getting in their face, insulting them, calling them names, yelling, raising your voice. But it's also not just letting it go, never bringing it up, and just trying to avoid the issues. You're going to tell people directly, calmly, confidently, level-headed, what you want, what you need, what the issue is. But at the same time, you're sensitive to the stability of your relationships with people, so you know when it's time to hold back a little bit, back off, let the person think about it in order to keep the relationship on good, solid, healthy terms. Okay, so that's assertive communication, but we have one more, and I'll put it up here since we ran out of room below. And that last one is passive-aggressive. Passive-aggressive communication. So it's interesting, but it's also sometimes a little frustrating. It's kind of a weird combination of these two, which, at least at first, it seems strange that these can be combined because they're really opposites. But people do that, and that's passive aggressive. So let me write it here, passive aggressive. Passive aggressive communication. This is when, so they combine elements of both of these. In line with the aggressive person, the passive aggressive communicator also wants to get their way. So that's how they're a little on the aggressive side. They want to get their way. But they don't want to come right out and just say it directly. They don't want to just address the issue head on. So instead of saying something to get their way, the person, they're passive in that way. They don't want to bring it up. So instead they use indirect, subtle strategies of manipulation to get the point across without saying it directly. So here's the way of defining that. One will not say openly or honestly what they want or need. What they want or need. But what they do is uses indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way. Okay, I'm writing manipulation to get their way. Sorry, it's a little compressed there, but that's what it says. And if I can maybe create a little border here. I'll read it also so that it's easy for you to understand. Passive aggressive, one will not say openly or honestly what they want or need, but uses indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way. Okay, so I want us to make this a little more real and relatable by simply considering a hypothetical scenario where these different 4 types of communication style could come into play. So scenario I guess I'd like to use is a roommate situation, okay? So I don't know, I guess now with the pandemic, a lot of people are not taking on roommates and they're just living at home and all of that. But it's a common enough idea, and whether you've had that experience or not, I'm sure you can imagine it. So here, imagine this. There's a household with a set of roommates, and there's a problem in the household. Basically, here's what it is. Everyone in the household that lives together as roommates is doing their chores and picking up after themselves like they should, except for one. One of the roommates has a real problem picking up after themselves, but they create a lot of mess. So they create dishes, you know, mess in the bathroom, clothes on the floor, stuff like that. And this person who's creating all this mess doesn't do their fair share of the chores. So it basically falls to all the other roommates in the household to pick up after them, to clean things, to keep the house neat and tidy. Because this individual, they simply create a bunch of mess and they don't do any of the chores. And it's upsetting to all the other roommates. They're talking about it on their own when that person's not there. And they're having these kind of conversations on their own. They're like, what is up with that one roommate? Someone needs to tell them they need to do their chores. It's getting to be too much. We're all busy. None of us want to sort of clean up after this person like we're their parents or something. So we have to bring it to their attention that they should do more on their end, because that's just fair to all of us, right? So they say someone has to go and speak to the one, messy roommate to inform them that we don't appreciate it and we would like it if they could start doing more household chores. Who's going to go talk to them, okay? So imagine that, let's send the aggressive guy in there. He'll deal with them, okay? Now my question for you guys here in the chat is this. How do you think the interaction might go with the aggressive communicator going in to talk to our roommate that's delinquent on the chores? How do you think that might play out? The aggressive guy's going to go in there charging in like a bull. Okay, Brittany, you say badly. I like that. Very straightforward and clear. You think it won't go well. And it probably won't go very well. Anybody else have any thoughts? A lot of yelling, fighting. Sure, that's another possibility. So here, like imagine this. Aggressive guy goes in there. He's like, yo, wait, I need to talk to you. The person's like, what's wrong? Well, I'll tell you exactly what's wrong. There is something wrong, and you're the thing that's wrong. You need to do more of the dishes, and you need to do more of the household chores. Straight up, I'm going to come straight at you and let you know we're not happy with you. You've been causing a mess all the time, never cleaning it up. I don't know who ever raised you, where you were raised, or how, but this is not okay. We don't want to do your chores. I'm not your dad. You're an adult. what the hell? Do more chores. Is it that hard? I mean, we all do them. Do you see us crying or whatever that we don't, have enough time or whatever to do these chores? No. The person's like, yeah, I know, but I thought I did. Nah. I'm talking. Stop trying to talk back. Do the chores, because next time it's going to be a worse problem. I don't want to deal with you like this, but you're getting me upset. So now, like, that's aggressive communication, right? On the one hand, I guess maybe that you could get your way in this case. Maybe, the aggressive communicator is breaking through, but there's a cost to that, right? Does the other person feel like they've been dealt with friendly or in a way that's respectful? No. So it can definitely alienate them. If you had any standing relationship with this person, you just hurt that relationship or damaged it or maybe broken it completely. So also, it could backfire. Sometimes when you treat someone like that, they're like, what? Well, if you're going to talk to me like that and you don't even respect me, I'm going to do even less of the chores. And there's other possibilities, too, of where it could backfire. Suppose that you deal with the person and they're aggressive, too. Two aggressive people butting heads, it has potential for escalation, even into violence. Like, hey, what's up? I need you to do the chores. What, you got a problem? No, I'm not doing them. Oh, really? What? So let's go. In a case like that, it could spin out of control. I'm not saying that aggressive communication never has its place. Sometimes, it's called for, I guess, when a forceful expression of something very important is necessary in a short amount of time. But for the most part, it should be used sparingly, because aggressive communicators, as much as they may get their way, are not well liked in life. It's a good way to lose friends and break relationships down. But if all you care about is getting your way, I mean, that's one thing I guess you can do. On the other hand, what about passive communication? So imagine that we send that guy in there to deal with it. How about the passive guy? Will you go do it? Oh, man, I don't want to do it. Really? Me? Yeah, go talk to him. So how do you think it would go if we send a passive communicator in there? Anybody have any reaction or thoughts? Something to throw into the chat? And then I'll try and expand upon that case too. Passive communication, dealing with our messy, uncleanly roommate. How do you feel like that might go? Some people are passive. Sometimes you deal with people that are passive. Sometimes you may be more or less passive. So just draw from life experience and use your creative thoughts. What do you think could be the possible outcome here? Nothing will be achieved, you say, Philip. Probably not. Because the passive person, they're so hesitant to make any kind of confrontation. They're so averse to raising any kind of issues that it'll be hard for them to overcome their inhibitions against even bringing the issue up to say something. But if they do, they're not going to be very pointed about it. Kellen, they might say that everyone else wants the person to start cleaning except themselves. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So kind of like what you're saying, I imagine this. Hey, do you have like a minute? I'm sorry, I know you're kind of busy, but there's something not me really, because I don't really care, but you know how the other roommates like talk and stuff? Sometimes they're saying like about all the chores around that like we do them and we clean up, but then you just like, I don't know, like what they were saying is that like you don't do as much, and I don't even know why, but they wanted me to tell you, could you maybe do more? It's just, I don't know, like, what do you think? And they're like, I didn't think I had any problem with the chores. Really? They're saying that about me? And then the passive guys would be like, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm sorry, it's okay, just maybe you'll talk to them sometime about it, it's whatever, sorry, I just kind of thought that I should say something, but it's not a big deal. So in that case, you're a pushover kind of. The person gives you any sign of resistance and you just back down, like, never mind, I don't want a conflict, I don't want to kind of press the issue against you. So passive people might not offend others, they might not get into a lot of fights and confrontations, but this person can also be walked all over, exploited, set aside, and all of that. So I'm not saying that passive communication never has its place either, though. It depends. I mean, you have to gauge the circumstances and who you're dealing with. If it's another passive person, that would be a pretty funny interaction, and it might work. I mean, hey, could I talk to you for a minute or something that they wanted me to say? Oh, sure, yeah, was something wrong? Oh, no, not really, but, well, kind of, I don't know. What is it? They want you to do more of the chores. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'll totally do it. No, it's all right. Like, both people conciliatory, both kind of apologizing for the nature of any kind of disagreement that they may appear to have. So it sometimes has its role and its place, but most of the time people can spot a passive person and they'll take advantage of that because they know that you're not going to feel comfortable bringing something up. And so that's when a lot of times assertive people, especially aggressive people, and even passive aggressive people, will just kind of sideline the whole issue. Okay, now assertive. Like I was saying before, I think assertive communication is a nice middle ground, a happy medium. It's not too weak and non-confrontational, nor is it too over the top, in your face, and mean. Assertive person is going to stay level-headed and calm, but they're going to bring it up. It'd be like, yeah, excuse me, I just need to talk to you for a moment. There's something that the other roommates wanted me to bring up, and I think we should just go into it. There's an issue with the household chores. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but it's just clear to us that you don't do enough, and it's not fair. We all have busy lives. We would probably like to have more free time too, but we have to end up cleaning a lot of the stuff. So we would just appreciate it if you would take that and try and make some changes to your habits in the house. Like, try and just do some more chores. Now, if the person starts to say, what? I mean, I thought I was doing enough, and this is really a problem. Well, look, I don't want to make you upset, and we can come back to this later, but if you don't start doing the chores, I can tell you this problem's just going to keep popping up because everyone's a little bit upset. So can we get these chores done? Is that okay? Now, that's assertive. You're going to tell the person what you want or need, but you also know that it's important not to upset this person, you know, hurt their feelings, make them feel, you know, like they've done something that they can never recover from or whatever. Now, passive-aggressive communication is kind of almost funny in a lot of cases. So this one, I'd like to see if anyone has any kind of judgment or guess. If a person is passive-aggressive, so they don't want to come right out and say, look, here's the issue, but they still want to kind of get the point across without saying it directly. What kind of things do you think indirectly a passive-aggressive communicator might do in this scenario here to get the point across without being upfront? What kind of things do passive-aggressive people do to get their way without saying it? What do you think might be the example? So I'll just give you a minute there as look at the chat and see if you have any thoughts. The simple question is, how do you feel like the passive-aggressive communicator would deal with this, potentially? Let's see. It just takes a second. There's a little lag, obviously, in the way that typed comments appear, so it's okay to take a few seconds, but let me know. I mean, sometimes we are passive-aggressive ourselves, or sometimes I know you have dealt with passive-aggressive people who want to get their way, but they're not comfortable saying it. So what do you think? Here we go, Brittany. You say, leaving your wet laundry on top of the washer so that they can't use it. I think maybe you meant to say. Yeah, so you could do stuff like that. You could sort of put your own mess in a place where it's going to be upsetting to them. And now it kind of becomes this passive-aggressive move where you're like, well, if they're not going to do dishes or chores, maybe I'll let them they'll get the picture if I just sort of make a mess that they can't ignore. And then they'll think a little bit more about the nature of cleaning and why you should do those chores. Oliver, you give another funny example. Talking within earshot about the person, maybe in a sarcastic tone, so that they get the point, but you didn't directly address them. Like you're outside in the next room with the other people, and you're like, wow, yeah, what do you guys think about messy people who never do their chores? Wow, that really is not great, huh? Glad that we don't know anybody around here that doesn't do all their chores, right, guys? And, you know, stuff like this, the person might get the picture or the message, even though you're not directly bringing it up. You might stop doing your own chores until they finally recognize that someone's upset enough that they've stopped. Brittany, you've had a roommate take my wet laundry out of the washer, leave it on top so they can use it, instead of directly asking me to switch my laundry to the dryer. Exactly. You know, people don't want to confront you, but they want to get their way, and they hope that you'll just interpret their actions in a way that's consistent with what they would have told you. Leave their dirty laundry in their room, sure. So it could be these sarcastic comments. It could be the strategic placement of items so that they kind of can't ignore the issue. But here's the problem with passive-aggressive communication. These kind of people think they're getting the best of both worlds. Like, I'm not upsetting anyone because I'm not saying things directly, but I'm also getting my way. The thing, though, is a lot of times people don't really respect passive-aggressive ways of trying to communicate, because oftentimes people just say, if you don't feel like you can tell me directly, then maybe I shouldn't take it seriously, right? If you're not going to actually have the guts to say what the issue is, why should you expect me to try and interpret your actions in a way where I'm going to figure it out on my own? So sometimes it'll work towards your desired outcome, but a lot of times it'll just make people annoyed and also maybe a bit kind of contemptuous of you for not having the guts to say it yourself. So, and if two people are both passive-aggressive, it becomes very awkward because neither one wants to say what's going on, but they keep dropping hints. And eventually someone has to say something, and then it becomes like a blow-up. So it's best, I think, to be assertive when you can. I know that by nature, some of us are more or less given to these different types of communication style, but even if it's not 100% comfortable, sometimes you got to step out of your typical lane to meet the needs of the situation and get the best results. So just be aware of the way people communicate, both you and other people, and sometimes you might have to, modify what you're doing in order to get to the right outcome that you want. Okay, so we now talked about 4 different styles of communication. Erase that, obviously. And I don't know, let me see if there's more in the book to just kind of add a little extra info on that. Yeah, so the assertive style is how we express ourselves when we are confident and we have strong self-esteem. Like effective critical thinkers, assertive communicators are able to clearly communicate their own needs, but also know their limits. Assertive communicators care about relationships and strive for mutually satisfactory solutions. Aggressive communication style involves an attempt to make other people do what we want through manipulation or control. Passive-aggressive communicators combine elements of passive and aggressive styles. They do not express themselves openly and honestly, communicate in a way that is indirect, subtle, and manipulative. For example, they use a facial expression that does not correspond with how they feel, such as smiling when in fact angry. So overall, passive communication is based on compliance and efforts to avoid confrontation at all costs. Such communicators don't want to rock the boat and often put their needs after other people's needs. There's some discussion after that I think I just didn't want to include in the notes because I didn't agree with all of it. Like they launch into a little piece of discussion after that about how there are sometimes general communication style trends that exist in different cultures or in different racial or gender categories. But I don't know if I really want to say that I agree with that because especially in the times that we're living in where the way that a person expresses their gender identity or their preference of any kind it's highly individual. And so the textbook talks about how many times women prefer feminine modes of communication style and men more masculine and aggressive. But I wouldn't necessarily agree. I mean, we can have aggressive communicating women, passively communicating men, and everything in between. Even if there are perhaps general patterns that can be observed, I think each individual is pretty much free to determine on their own what their identity is and how they have a tendency to communicate. Same with racial categories. That was another thing in the text that I really don't find favor with because I think it relies on stereotypes that perhaps might not be better perpetuated. But I'll say this. One thing that I thought had at least some interest or a kernel of truth is that if you just look at cultural preferences of communication, there do seem to be broadly some differences between American style communication and then what is more prevalent in places like Europe or East Asia. So famously, Americans seem to have a preference for more aggressive and assertive forms of communication than our European and East Asian counterparts, where the ideal of communitarian thinking is more normal. In America, we really value the individual and individual liberty. So, for example, we have this kind of service culture here in our country where the customer is always right and you feel free to demand whatever you want from customer service or from people waiting on you or from people in the service industry. So in America, if you say, hey, I need a refill, or when is my food coming out, or anything like that, that's kind of normal because they're catering to all your demands and desires. That's American service culture. But in Europe or East Asia, if you make those same kind of demands, like when you're sitting at a cafe, hey, where's my refill, or when's the food coming? It's perceived in that culture as highly insensitive, overly assertive and aggressive, obnoxious. So as an American traveling around the world, sometimes you have to keep in view the cultural context that you're operating in, because behavior that's judged as normal and expected here can seem aloof, insensitive, aggressive, whatever in other parts of the world. So keeping that in mind, being a social chameleon, is to your benefit unless you really just don't mind upsetting people everywhere you go. But there's difficulties and costs to that, of course. So it's just something to keep in mind. Okay. So then anyway, yeah, and I would say about passive communication, I don't know if I mentioned this, but if you're a passive communicator, you also suffer from the loss of opportunities because you don't negotiate so hard for yourself. Imagine that you got a job and now it's time to negotiate for your salary. and you give an offer and the employer gives a counter offer that's lower. If you're a passive communicator, you might just say, oh, I don't want to rock the boat or upset them, so let's just say, oh, that's fine, yeah, you know, I can build myself up to the bigger salary later. If you had a more assertive person, and then they might say, well, you know, I don't know, I really think that it's important for me to have that base salary that I suggested. Can we negotiate a little bit? So it's not just in everyday polite conversation and social interaction, but it's in professional life, academic life, and other things where you sometimes have to stand up for yourself and be assertive. Okay, so then what we're going to talk about next are some different rhetorical devices. Oh, and hi there, Matthias. Good to see you. Not to worry, I see you here in the chat, so thanks for being here, and it's all good. What I had said earlier, I don't know if you're here at the beginning, is just that I've graded all the quizzes and homeworks, so those that are looking for scores can email me, and I'll be able to reply within 48 hours. Through the weekend, I'm probably just going to be getting back to everyone that wants to know on their scores. And other than that, we will have our midterm in 3 weeks, so we're just developing more notes on Chapter 3, and then next week, Chapter 4. Okay, so the next thing that's in the book that I wanted to discuss are different rhetorical devices. So rhetorical devices, this is when one uses language to psychologically persuade someone instead of using reason. So sometimes through the use of language, one's views can be shaped or molded. And we need to know what these rhetorical devices are that seek to shape our opinions and views, because then we'll be able to see through them and come to our own conclusions without the effect of the rhetoric, you know, negatively influencing the way we judge something. So, okay, different rhetorical devices. Uses of language to persuade without reason. Sometimes they're a little manipulative. Oh, it's okay, Jordan. Yeah, if anyone else didn't get to say anything in the chat, just know that it's nice to have it as a record. I'm honestly not doing much with it, but I like to keep these records. For example, sometimes after the semester is over, I'll get an email from the school, and they will say, we need to know the last date of attendance for such and such a student who ended up dropping out because for financial aid purposes, they need us to report to the government how far they got through the class. So it's only usually in cases like that where I have to go back to my records, retrieve the information, and then report it. For my own purposes, I don't really much mind, but it's always good to be with people, and I like to have these classes where we meet. That's why I do live online instead of just, you know, whatever. You never deal with the teacher. I don't know how that class kind of works, but anyway. So rhetorical devices. One of them is euphemism. So euphemism is when a person replaces a negative sounding or a neutral sounding word with a more positive one in order to kind of sugarcoat the truth, to make something basically seem or sound better than it otherwise would without the euphemism. So let me write that here. When one replaces a negative or neutral word with a positive one, and why? In order to sugarcoat the truth. So that's euphemism. When a person replaces a negative or neutral word with a more positive sounding one, and they do it to sugarcoat the truth, meaning that they're sorry, a little hiccup. They're trying to make it seem better than it might actually be. So for example, we deal with euphemisms all the time. Maybe you've not been able to label them as such until you learn this terminology, but we hear them all the time. They're oftentimes used in marketing and advertising, sometimes in political speech, sometimes in media that we encounter on all different forms. So let's give you this example. Say that someone is selling a car, and so they're going to put up an ad for the car to try and generate interest in buying it from somebody. So they want to describe this car to those that might buy it. And one fact about this car is that it is old. This is an old car, very old. So that doesn't sound great. If you just say, hey, come check out the old car, maybe not a lot of people are going to want to look at it. But there's another word you could use to replace with old, which kind of has a better sound. It sounds nicer, more positive. What do you think could be a nice euphemism for the fact that this car is old and ancient? Instead of saying that, you could just describe it as a little bit of a nicer, pleasant sounding label that kind of conveys that information. So we wouldn't say, come check out the old car. There you go, classic, vintage. Come check out this classic, vintage, retro car. You know, in such a case as that, you're trying to make the fact that it's old sound better. Now, is it the same car whether you call it old or whether you call it vintage? It is, but language can have a powerful influence on shaping a person's point of view towards it. Hearing that it's vintage, you're like, I like vintage cars. Hearing that it's old, you're like, nobody wants something old and half falling apart. Maybe you're selling a house, and the house is small. It's a small house. Is that what you're really going to say in the ad? Come check out the tiny house I'm listing. No, because then people won't want it. But another way of putting it that might sound better, a little euphemism for the fact that it's small, could be to just say, what? You kind of have a sense of this? Maybe what I'm kind of fishing around for, don't say it's small, but maybe you could say that it's, what? There you go, cozy, quaint. Isn't that nice? It's compact. I like that one, Philip. Yeah. Come check out this cozy, quaint little, snug little house. It's great, very cozy. That doesn't sound too bad. But if you say, check out the small, cramped, tiny house, that's not going to generate any interest. So sometimes we have to be able to see through euphemisms that are used in media, marketing, and political speech. Yeah, perfect for a small family or couple. I like that. I've actually heard ads just like that. And so that's totally good. How about, if you can think of others, just throw them out there at any point. But sometimes with death, right? Death is so disturbing and final, and people don't want to say he's dead, he died, he's gone. So instead they'll say something that sounds much more pleasant than that. He's passed away, or he's in a better place. Passing away doesn't sound too bad. You're just going from one place to another, in a better place even. So how bad is that? Not bad at all. So, you know, shaping the person's perspective on it through the euphemistic label is another way that people try and shape your view. How about politically, okay? So in the Bush administration, George W. Bush, yeah, so he's at rest, resting in peace and all of that, yes. How about this? In the Bush W administration, there were certain forms of treatment that were applied to detainees in U.S. custody, including in Guantanamo Bay prison. And some of you may have heard of this: waterboarding, stress positions, not letting people sleep for a long time. International monitors moved on. Yeah, he's moved to the astral plane. But I was saying that, you know, some of the forms of treatment that were applied to some of the detainees in U.S. custody, like that were apprehended in various theaters of war internationally, amount to torture, according to like humanitarian monitors and legal monitors. But instead of calling it torture, the administration labeled these forms of treatment enhanced interrogation tactics. Now that's a real euphemism. Interrogation, not in itself a bad thing, just want information, right? And to enhance something, well, that's always to make it better. So we're not torturing, we're just having enhanced interrogation. Meanwhile, these people are half drowning and being like left to die in cold positions, you know, that are hard to even maintain. So making a person feel like it's not so bad by just applying a much more happy sounding label to it. That's another case of a euphemism. Even in Nazi Germany, right? I mean, he didn't say this is the annihilation of all the Jewish people. He saw this as a solution, final solution or something. That's mentioned in the book too. Or take when people don't want to refer to like certain genitalia, private parts, and stuff like that. So euphemisms oftentimes try to make something sound better than it otherwise would, and we need to be aware of that so that we don't necessarily take the bait and just, you know, accept the more positive characterization of something based merely on a euphemistic label. I'm looking in the book, seeing if there's others. Oh, how about this? Your boss is going to fire you. Or do we just say he let me go? I've been let go. I'm free. I'm in between jobs. That's a euphemism for me being unemployed. That doesn't sound so bad. I'm in between jobs. I mean, I'm about to get another one, but it's not definite whether it's going to happen. Doesn't that sound better than saying I'm out of work and just I don't work? I don't know, like another possible case, okay, they're going to slash the workforce. They're going to like lay off and they're going to can, you know, like half of the people that work there. These people are going to get fired. That doesn't sound good. So instead, the corporate lingo is, oh, we're going to right-size the workforce. We're just going to balance the workforce and make it the proper size. It sounds much nicer, right? We're just kind of bringing everything into proportion and saying everyone's losing their job and their livelihood. So whether it's in politics, media, marketing, advertising, you have to know that these euphemisms are out there and they're trying to, in a way, manipulate your perspective on something and shape it in a more positive direction. Now, the opposite of the euphemism is another rhetorical device, and that's what is called the dysphemism, okay? And as you might expect, dysphemism is just the reverse definition. So this is when you replace a positive or neutral word with a negative sounding one to have the opposite effect, to try and create disapproval towards that thing. Okay, so replacing a positive or neutral word with a negative one and why? In order to create disapproval. Dysphemism, opposite of euphemism. So sometimes people want to have the opposite effect. They want you to come away with a more negative take on something, and therefore they'll use a dysphemistic label to describe it. So, for example, maybe someone's smoking cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes, and someone that doesn't like cigarettes says, "What are you doing over there, you know, with those?" You know what I'm talking about? Like, there's a dysphemism that some people use for cigarettes. I don't know if this is widely known or understood, but probably some of you've heard it. Anybody have a sense of this? Don't call it a cigarette. That sounds too nice. Let's give it a hardcore dysphemistic label, cancer stick. There you go, Steven. So what are you doing sucking on those cancer sticks? Now that's a pretty negative sounding thing. This is a stick. You're sucking on it. Will give you cancer. Cancer kills you. Doesn't sound at all as neutral or positive as a cigarette or a smoke. So not saying there's anything good about cigarettes, but if you want to understand or study what's bad about them, you can do research and you'd be able to see through actual research and like well-sourced argument that it does have carcinogens that are not so good for you. But just using the dysphemistic label kind of prevents a person from coming to the conclusion based on evidence. Other cases I could mention. There's a tax policy in our country which is called the estate tax. Some call it the inheritance tax. And that is if you have wealth of a certain amount, like in the millions, then when you cross a certain threshold, the transfer of your wealth to your next of kin when you pass away or, well, maybe die, I don't know which word you'd like to use, but when a person is gone and they pass on their wealth to their next of kin, if this is a sufficient amount of wealth, then the government collects a certain percentage of it on the transfer to the next. So some people, of course, a lot of wealthy people don't like this inheritance tax. So instead of calling it the inheritance or estate tax, which sounds neutral or even not so bad, it's often called the death tax. Death tax sounds so bad because it's like it's trying to imply that, oh, you're going to get taxed just for dying. Can I die in peace? I thought I would at least be able to die without being taxed for it, but you'll be taxed for dying. Now, that way of describing it as death tax kind of deprives people of the ability to engage in rational debate about whether it's a good or a bad policy. Because I think, you know, there could be legitimate reasons given as to why people of sufficient means are being asked to give something back to the system that they've amassed such wealth in when they pass it on to next of kin. But anyway, that's another example. Sometimes when you want to give a negative label to a political adversary, you use these dysphemisms. So like, you know, people call themselves pro-choice if they believe in a woman's right to choose with abortion. So an opponent of the pro-choice position can say, you're anti-life. These people are anti-life. On the other side of the coin, people call themselves pro-life when they believe that abortion is immoral. So an opponent of pro-life can say, you guys are anti-choice. So pro-life sounds nice, anti-choice sounds negative. Pro-choice sounds nice, anti-life sounds negative. So sometimes people will try and shape views through the invention or application of these dysphemisms. So they mentioned the death tax in the textbook. Suppose you have a religious friend that's very devoutly religious, so they're very serious about their religion and practice, so you call them a fanatic instead of just a devout person. That carries with it all the negative associations of being unable to think independently and all of that. But saying someone is devout, I don't know, I guess one person's euphemism is another's dysphemism. Okay, so anyway then, guys, you have to see through the way that language is sometimes used to shape the perspective that we have on things. Come to your own conclusions. Don't just allow a euphemism or a dysphemism to rope you into someone else's prior judgment or take on something. Now, we do have a couple more of these rhetorical devices. So the ones that we will speak on when we come back, there's hyperbole, sarcasm, and deception. So we have plenty of time to finish with chapter 4 because I've devoted 3 meetings to that. And that means that we can take a few minutes at the beginning on Tuesday to just round out the last couple notes here. So I gave you 2 of the rhetorical devices. On Tuesday's meeting, we'll just begin with these last few. There's hyperbole, there's sarcasm, and then there's also deception. So we'll talk about those 3, and then we'll be all done with chapter 3. And then we'll move ahead and start talking about chapter 4 in the book. So for anybody, I would ask that you just try to read through the pages listed in the syllabus for the upcoming meetings next week. It's not a ton of pages, so you should be able to get through it. That'll definitely help you understand the lectures and the content a little more. And then the plan is that we'll finish with chapter 4 in the next 3 classes, and then we'll get started with review for the upcoming midterm on the 25th. So I don't know, I don't want to run through any of these in the last few minutes of class because I want to give them the full measure of time that they need. So I think I'll probably let us go for now. But let me just make sure that we're all together and you guys are good for the weekend. Let me know in the chat that we've reached the end and that everything's fine. If you have any questions or something that I didn't cover or something that's not clear, you can let me know right now. Other than that, I guess, wishing you guys a happy weekend. I'll see you back on Tuesday when we return. Okay, thanks a lot, Lan, and everybody else. As I said, the grades are done for the first quiz, but you have to ask me just by email to get your score. And when you send me a message, I'll be back in touch with you within a couple of days. So again, thanks so much, everybody, for attending and for making the lecture an interesting lecture. Appreciate it, and I'll see you guys back then. So take it easy and let me know if you need anything through email. All right, then. Bye-bye.